Shalom, everybody. This is Dave from Universal Truth to Mankind, and I am your host. And this is Buyer Beware. This is where we go beyond just a surface understanding of a passage and try to remove thousands of years of religious rhetoric and get to what the verse actually is saying. Now, before I get started, please like and share these videos. Get it out there. I really do want to help people, and I think this information can help many in their walk. Also, I'm on Rumble and YouTube. Try to be, please subscribe to both. I do have the videos on both of them. Just as in case I decide to leave YouTube or something like that, you'll still be able to get my videos. So let's get started. Here are the three verses we're going to be touching on, but they all have one thing in common. That's Exodus 23:19, Exodus 34:26, and Deuteronomy 14:21. What do they have in common? Well, look at the end of each of the verses, and they all say the same thing. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now, like I said in a previous video, and by the way, feel free to look at the previous Buyer Beware videos by going down to the description and clicking on the playlist for Buyer Beware. You definitely watch the previous ones because they do get useful information that may help you understand this or these particular verses. Now, context is something I spoke about last time. It is so important to understand a passage in its context. So that's why you have to read the verse before and after. Once you read it before and after, you can determine whether you need to read more after or more before and after. And yes, some verses do pretty much stand on their own, but it's still important to look through the context of the verse in order to understand and to give more understanding and depth of understanding to the portion of that verse we're looking at or the entire verse. The first thing we need to do is to look at each word here, just at a cursory level here. It says, you shall not boil. Some say cook. Same difference. Why do I say that? Let's say you to roast an animal. It's still pretty much the same process that's taking place. You'll see that shortly. The other is, oh, and then it says kid. Interesting, it says a kid. It doesn't say sheep. It doesn't say a calf. It doesn't say a cow or a goat. It doesn't say a deer, but a kid. And then it talks about the milk, the mother's milk in this case, it says. And we really need to look at all three of these things to better understand what are we talking about. Now, as I was saying, boiling, cooking, roasting, they're all the same. Why? Because flesh has moisture in it. Milk has moisture in it. So when you put the two together, let's say in roasting, you can hear the sizzling. You grill something, you hear the sizzling. That's moisture. That's moisture that's intermingling with each other. And that brings up another point that we need to touch on before we move on. What is the issue here? Can we cook a kid or a goat's meat, kid's meat, a rack of lamb? Can we cook a lamb? Can we cook a kid? Yes, we can. We can do those things. You can do it also with dairy. But what this becomes is what our sages tell us, this is a mixture issue. It's combining both of these items together in a cooking process that we cannot do. So we always deep dive to the physical whenever we read something like this and say, oh my gosh, I can't have a cheeseburger. But there's more to it than that because we're talking about a mixture. And we will see how to apply that concept in a couple of different layers or in a few layers of thought and ideas and understanding. Now, again, kid. Okay, let's backtrack. Boiling, cooking. Now, explain that where in this particular case, it's the moistures coming together, the flavors coming together is what we're supposed to avoid. Now we could say, well, you can't cook them together. However, how long do we have to wait before we can have the other? In other words, I'm going to have some meat and then I want some dairy. I'm going to have some cheese. I like my cheese. I love Swiss cheese. I know some people love cheddar cheese and so on and so forth. What is the time wait? Well, there's never really talked about. Now, our stomachs empty themselves about every 20 minutes. I have heard some restrictions that take as much as 6 to 8 hours between those meals. So basically you have a dairy day for eating and you have a meat day for eating, and that's all you eat for that day versus combining them during the day. The one that I heard that tends to make reasonable sense to me because the stomach does empty itself is have your meal, wait a half an hour, then have some bread. And that bread now will create a barrier between you and the cheese. So you eat it and then wait, no, that half an hour, we'll say, let's use half an hour, for instance. So you eat the meat, you wait a half an hour, let it get into your system, get it out of your stomach. Now eat cheese. I've seen people go to brushing their teeth, waiting a certain amount of hours, eating the bread, and so on and so forth. Remember, these are communal standards. And actually, let me explain this a little bit more from that perspective. When you are part of a community that follows certain rules, you're obligated to follow those rules. Now, you may be saying, hey, that's kind of restrictive. Well, think about it for a moment. We have a constitution in the United States of America. We have federal laws. We have state laws. We have county laws. We have town or municipality laws. And if we belong to, let's say, a retirement community or a gated community, they have their rulings too that you have to abide by. So we are more restricted than these communities that we're talking about. So when we start pointing fingers, it always does this, all right? It always starts pointing back to the person who's speaking. And I'm all right with that. Let's talk about the kid for a moment. What is unique about it? Says kid, yes, but how does that relate to a cheeseburger? If you said goat burger, I would understand. How does it apply? Well, what we're talking about, because remember, this is mentioned 3 times. This is speaking of a clean animal that we can eat, has a split hoof and chews its cud. Now, a pig we can't eat has a split hoof, doesn't chew its cud. We can eat venison. Why? Because the deer has split hoof, chews its cud. A cow, the same thing. So any animal that chews its cud and has a split hoof, we're permitted to eat because it is considered clean. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that category of animal that we can eat. Now it talks about mother's milk. I don't like the fact that it says mother's milk. It really should say mother milk or milk. It should just say milk. And I don't mean almond milk. I mean milk from a mother. So a kid, are we talking now a kid and its mother's milk, goat's milk? Are we talking about a calf and a cow's milk? A deer and a deer's milk? We can't combine those, but we could combine a milk from another species of animal that's clean with this animal. Is that what we're talking about? That's why I say it should say the milk of a mother, meaning that's all milk. Give you an example. Let's say, and I've seen this done where a doe lost its mother. So what do people use to bring that deer up? Well, if you go to like farmers and stuff like that, they will use goat's milk. Goat's milk is one of the best milks for anyone, for humans, for any practically any species. I don't know of any species can't use that milk. However, there may be one that I'm not aware of. So this milk, it's interesting. It chooses a kid, not a sheep, not a cow. Talking about which is a very generic milk that any animal can use. So there's a prohibition for any dairy product with any of these clean animals. It is that simple. But like I said, we always deep dive into the physical. There's more to this picture than meets the eye. So let's think about this for a moment. What does milk do? Milk helps a newborn mature. At some point, it's cut off until it can eat the grass. But till then, it needs the mother's milk. When is a animal weaned off the mother's milk? Depends on the species, of course. It weaned off as soon as it's capable of eating grass. Now keep that in mind for a moment. A kid, a child consumes mother's milk till it can eat regular food. A child should not be cooked in its mother's milk. In other words, the mother's milk has to be a source of nourishment and growth. But if you boil the kid in its mother's milk, the child in the mother's milk, then you are putting judgment on that child. How do we do that? Do you ever see overbearing mothers? See, we're here to not only provide physical help to the child to grow. Remember, I teach here about the soul, mind, and body. So from a body point of view, we have our answer. No dairy, no meat at all, no mixture. We get that. At a mental level, we are to nourish our children to mature mentally. So are we to put too much upon the child? We had to grow the child to take on more and more responsibilities. We are not there to hammer a child and try to make it do what we want it to do. Rather, we are there to instruct the child and at some point wean off, and the child will make its own decisions. You see how that comes together there. You can't mix the two together. I'm not talking about consumption here, but we can't cook them together. Now let's go to a soul level. Now, if you want more information before I go to the soul level, want more information on this, go to the Talmud. The Talmud will give you a lot of explanations here, and it's closer to the sources. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning. The Mishnah does tell us that we can't even have cheese, dairy product with a bird, in other words, chicken or turkey. In which I say, show me when you can, show me how to milk a turkey. Show me how to milk a chicken. Can't be done. It says that in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah has a very high authority, but this is where you have to read the Gemara or the Talmud portion, the commentary portion of that Mishnah ruling, we'll call it. We find out that that is rabbinical teaching. Now, I throw out rabbinical teachings and I think for myself. I'm not part of a community, so I have that capability. So, but if I'm in a community where they do not mix dairy and fowl, I will abide by that community's rules for the sake of the community. So this is like, it is rabbinical, but it's trying to be inclusive of all diverse groups. You know, if we all agree to this standard, then we won't offend anybody. or we won't misguide people. That's what that's about. So you have to understand that. Do your own research on it. And you see what I say. You see what I mean. Take your Talmud and search for it. All right, now we're going to go to the Zohar. I looked up these three verses in Zohar, and I did look up this concept of the meat and the milk, trying to better understand from a spiritual point of view, more of a higher soul point of view of what's being taught. And what it teaches is that Israel is considered the milk, Malkut, Shekinah. The goat is an animal that's headstrong. It wants to do its own thing. It has its own desires for its own thing. It hasn't like an ego, so to speak. And they're very ornery creatures. They want what they want, and they'll eat anything, and they'll butt heads with you with anything. They're not afraid of anything. Does that not sound familiar for children growing up? So, in other words, it's saying don't mix these desires to do its own thing with the teachings, the milk that Israel has. Don't mix the two. Don't mix the two. Now, that does not mean that a goat can't become docile and compliant. It can. It will remove, we're talking about attributes here. A person can lose its goat-like attributes and become a very loving and pursuant of the Creator with all of its heart's desires. And then you can mix the two. But till then, you can't mix it. You have to keep them separated. Look through your Zohar and you will see that mentioned. So, in conclusion, you can't mix the two together at all. You have to determine how much time is going to pass. Is it a matter of time? Do you have to have a piece of bread beforehand? You have to determine that. We know our stomachs empty itself every 20 minutes. So I would say, given an error margin, say anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes is probably a reasonable amount of time to make that judgment call. If you want to have a dairy day and a meat day, fine, do that. That's okay. It's up to you. But it's important to understand, because it mentioned three times here, that we have to go to not only understanding the breadth of this verse, with all its key points being the boiling, the cooking, the kid, and the milk, understanding that at a physical level, but understanding at a mind level. Remember, your mind is where your heart is not here. Your heart is actually up here. It's your decision-making process. Your desires are up here, not here. So it's the body, the mind, and then the soul. And that's why I looked at all three levels. So we got to look at the breadth and the depth of what we're talking about. Take care, everybody. Shalom, shalom.